The armed forces of Ukraine are conducting a counteroffensive in the Donetsk direction. Zelensky has spoken about the first successes. Meanwhile, Putin has named the number of invaders fighting on the front line. The numbers are staggering. The first batch of weapons purchased by the Allies has arrived in the USA. The EU is preparing a reparations loan for Kyiv amounting to 210 billion euros funded by frozen Russian assets. The Kremlin is already in a panic. The offensive on Kupiansk is being commanded by a collaborator from Ukraine. Meanwhile, 8 luxury apartments in the USA have been found belonging to the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council and the former Minister of Defense. The question remains, where did the money for this real estate come from? In the studio, Yana Kochkrova, and more news ahead. Stories that everyone in Ukraine is talking about today. Last night, Kyiv once again endured an attack by kamikaze drones. Russian occupiers launched attack drones at the capital. Some of them were shot down by air defense forces, but debris fell directly onto the city. In the Shevchenkivsky district, pieces of an enemy UAV crashed onto the roadway and damaged the trolley bus network. Another drone crash and explosion were recorded in the Solomiansky district. Fortunately, according to preliminary information, there are no casualties. Zelensky discussed with the commanders of the air assault forces the active defense of Pokrovsk and Myrny Hrad. They discussed the next steps, preparation, and staffing of the air assault units. They also talked about the specifics of carrying out tasks, particularly in coordination with unmanned systems units. Zelensky stated that we are conducting one of the counteroffensive operations, emphasizing that fierce battles are ongoing, but our forces have managed to inflict significant losses on the enemy. According to the initial report from the Commander-in-Chief, 160 square kilometers have been liberated since the start of the operation. More than 170 additional square kilometers have been cleared of the occupiers. The exchange fund has been significantly replenished. Almost 100 Russian prisoners have already been captured, and there will be more. In this direction, 7 settlements have been liberated and another 9 have been cleared of Russian presence.
Any hostile group of potential occupiers that attempts to enter this area is swiftly and completely destroyed by our skilled hunters. Russian losses just since the start of our counteroffensive operation only in the Bakhmut area just in these past weeks have already exceeded 2,500. Of those, more than 1,300 Russians have been killed.
Ukraine and Poland are reaching a new level of military cooperation. A memorandum was signed in Warsaw to create a joint group for training in drone operations management. The goal is simple and at the same time strategic. Joint training, exchange of combat experience, testing new methods of using and countering drones, integration, innovation, and compatibility with NATO standards. This was emphasized by Defense Minister Denis Shmyhal. At the same time, the defense ministers of Ukraine and Poland signed a joint declaration on expanding defense partnership within the framework of the SAFE and PURL programs. According to the agreements, Ukraine will teach Polish military personnel how to build a drone line and will grant access to the attack monitoring systems, while Poland, with the support of Norway, will create a modern training ground for UAV operation training. The first military equipment has arrived in Ukraine as part of agreements with the US and NATO under the PURL program, a representative of the alliance told Suspilne. And this is just the beginning. New deliveries are expected in the near future. According to him, even more aid packages are already on their way. So far, 4 support packages for Ukraine have been funded under the PURL program. 700,000 Russian soldiers. That's the shocking figure Vladimir Putin cited, claiming that these forces are currently deployed on the front against Ukraine. The cynical dictator, with a kind of sly and undisguised admiration, speaks of his occupiers. Listen.
Therefore, Prince, on the lines of combat contact, there are 700,000 of your own.
700,000 for Putin's army has its traitors watching. The assault on Kupiansk is commanded by the Ukrainian collaborator Serhiy Sinitsyn, who betrayed Ukraine back in 2014. According to BBC News, he reports directly to the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. Storozhenko is originally from the Kharkiv region, a former commander of the 36th Brigade of the Ukrainian Navy, who once served in the KFOR forces in Kosovo. After betraying Ukraine, he headed the 126th Coastal Defense Brigade in occupied Crimea. Later, he joined the staff of the 35th Army of the Russian Federation, which Ukrainian soldiers crushed near Izium in 2022. In 2023, the Kremlin promoted him to lieutenant general and put him in command of the 6th Army of the Russian Federation, which is currently fighting in the Kharkiv region. According to Colonel Vladislav Seleznyov, it was Storozhenko who was involved in the missile strikes on Sumy and played a double game even during the annexation of Crimea. Every traitor and war criminal will definitely be punished for the bloodshed in Ukraine. Recently, Russian intelligence officer Serhiy Sinitsyn, with the call sign Sabir, was sentenced in absentia to life imprisonment. He is an employee of the 9th Directorate of the Department of Operational Information of the 5th Service of the FSB. It was he who, in 2022, oversaw the Occupation Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Russian Federation in Kherson. According to the investigation, in March 2022, Sinitsyn coordinated the creation of the occupation police and organized repressions against civilians, including raids, abductions, and torture. In the torture chambers, people were beaten and electrocuted, mock executions were staged, and threats were made against their families. In addition, the FSB officer was involved in recruiting agents among former Ukrainian officials. The key to ending Russia's war against Ukraine lies in the price of oil. That's what President Donald Trump believes. It's very simple. If the price of oil drops, Putin will back down. He will have no choice. He will abandon this war. Trump insisted on this at a joint press conference with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The American president once again called on European countries to completely stop buying Russian oil. Earlier, Reuters reported that during an online meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, Trump emphasized that it is specifically European money for oil that fuels the Russian war machine. We have gathered all the information on strengthening sanctions pressure on the Russian Federation in this report.
At any cost, not to quarrel with Vladimir. In Washington, they've come up with a new move to avoid putting pressure on Moscow, but at the same time not to appear completely anti-Russian. To do this, Trump is setting Europe a deliberately impossible condition, writes the Wall Street Journal.
Listen, Europe, they're my friends, but they're buying oil from Russia. So you can't expect that we'll be the only ones who, will be completely absorbed by this. Well, Europe is buying oil from Russia. I don't want them to buy oil, and the sanctions they're imposing aren't tough enough. And I'm ready to impose sanctions, but they need to tighten their sanctions to match what I'm doing. They're buying a lot of oil from Russia. That's not right.
As analysts and publications point out, the White House administration had already calculated in advance that EU countries would not be able or willing to meet Trump's demands. And since he is demanding that all EU countries stop buying oil from Russia, their failure to comply gives him an excuse to avoid increasing economic pressure on the Russian Federation.
Economic pressure. Economic pressure. This is a way and an attempt to make excuses and not impose any sanctions against his beloved Vladimir. And to shift the blame onto someone else, to say that it's not my fault, it's not my responsibility, it's Europe. They refuse to do so.
What's paradoxical is that the two largest consumers of Russian oil in the EU remain Hungary and Slovakia, whose leaders are personally on friendly terms with Trump and over whom he has considerable influence. Analysts explain that for them, there are no real problems in switching to Western logistics for oil products and gas. Moreover, trade with the Russian Federation can no longer be justified by long-term commitments or economic benefit.
Hungary has always consistently referred to the undeniable fact that breaking these existing contracts could potentially lead to very large financial penalties. The contracts have ended, but Hungary is still buying Russian oil on the spot market to this day. Buying it is quite expensive, and recently it became clear how much oil products cost for end consumers in various European countries. For Hungary and Slovakia, the price turned out to be the highest.
So, besides gas from Russia, these countries are getting something else as well, analysts add. And most likely this is about financial gain, not for the country, but for certain individuals in the country. Moreover, in addition to demands from Trump to stop trading with Moscow, there are also calls in Europe to impose sanctions, in part against China, which sounds rather hypocritical considering the lack of such restrictions from the US side.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
A 100% tariff, as proposed, is supposed to be implemented by Europe. At the same time, Trump himself is hesitant to impose additional sanctions on China. He wants to do it through European sanctions instead.
Europe, on the other hand, appeals to the opposite mechanism. Let the US set the pace and we'll join in, which in fact is how it has always been. In turn, Ukraine responded to this game of broken telephone quite logically. If both sides are only talking theoretically, then they're just making things up. If someone is ready to impose sanctions, then let the one who doesn't need to discuss it with partners and can quickly formalize it legally go first.
I believe that America has enough sanctions to deal a blow to the Russian economy. And Donald Trump has enough power for Putin to be afraid of him. That's exactly how it is. In this case, Europe should act in alliance with the United States of America. But we have to understand that we can't wait until all European countries cut this or that contact with Russia. Whether it's oil or other relations, he's right about that. Europe needs to stop any purchases of energy resources from Russia, but we shouldn't just wait. I don't completely agree with that. It seems to everyone that America is strong enough to restrain Putin.
Once again, seeing the US reaction to Russia, it looks like even the boldest are already calculating whether it's worth starting a war. Analysts, after recently listening to Lavrov's speech, have concluded that the Kremlin, in principle, is not currently considering the topic of negotiations. He explained that territorial exchanges will not stop the war, nor will the restoration of trade with the West, or, for example, the strengthening of sanctions.
The continuous tightening of economic sanctions pressure, which still makes absolutely no logical sense, has no truly decisive or significant impact on the overall Russian economy.
However, that's only the official stance. In reality, the prospect of sanctions does frighten the Russian elite, which is clearly evident in the statements of propagandists who have decided to fight the new threats using old playbooks.
In the case of
the recent dismissal of Putin's ally Dmitry Kozak also falls into the Kremlin's anti-negotiation policy piggy bank. He made the mistake of telling the bunker leader that it was time to stop shooting and in the Kremlin to sit down at the negotiating table, but contradicting the bunker leader is not customary in the Russian Federation, especially at a time when he is convinced that Washington is playing into his hands and is essentially giving him carte blanche for a military solution to the issue.
The only thing Trump can give him at this point is time. And Trump gives him another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks. And now, finally, they've just given up and given him 2 years. Until January 28th? Volodya, will that be enough for your goals? If, at the same time, we try somehow to interfere with you, to do it gently, as if to punish the people who trade with you, you still end up with China.
At the same time, it should be noted that European officials are not lacking in patience and political strategy. Slowly but surely, they are persuading Trump, time after time, to take the side of good. The decision to sell weapons to Europe for Ukraine is a vivid confirmation of this. And, in my expert opinion, soon there will be enough of these weapons, and it will be Moscow that will be asking for negotiations.
The EU is preparing a reparations loan for Ukraine using frozen Russian assets. This was reported by Reuters. We're talking about a colossal sum of around 210 billion euros, which is currently blocked in Europe. The initiative is being promoted by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. The plan is intended to meet Kyiv's military needs while also bypassing a possible veto from Budapest. According to the proposal, the assets will not be confiscated but used as collateral. Ukraine will receive a loan which will be repaid after reparations are collected from Russia. To do this, it is proposed to issue special zero-coupon bonds, guaranteed by EU countries. The mechanism could be launched even without all 27 members in a coalition of willing countries. The European Union may accelerate a complete phase-out of Russian LNG under pressure from Donald Trump, Bloomberg reports. Officially, according to the plan, the European Commission is currently considering including a provision in the new sanctions package to end imports of liquefied gas from the Russian Federation by the end of 2027. According to the publication, Brussels may amend this plan and speed up the rejection of Kremlin gas in order to finally break its energy dependence on Moscow. Estonia is ahead of the European Union and will definitely close its doors to Russian gas completely starting in 2026. The government made the corresponding decision the day before. Currently, the restriction only applies to the use of Russian liquefied gas in distribution networks, but it can still be imported outside of them. After the changes, the ban will become absolute. The import of any LNG and LPG will be blocked. This is a matter of our security and a matter of principle. This was emphasized by Estonia's Minister of Foreign Affairs Margus Tsahkna. Is it really all for the sake of a Ukrainian missile? Denmark will ignore about 20 laws in order to build a plant for the company developing Flamingo missiles. A unique initiative that became possible thanks to the new national security law. The document gives the government the right to repeal or not apply regulations and even restrict the right to appeal if it concerns defense or extraordinary projects. The law is intended to speed up the modernization of military facilities, the renovation of barracks, and the construction of strategic capacities. The direct motive is the threat from Russia, but how is Denmark preparing for a possible war? More in the report.
Denmark will purchase long-range missiles and drones due to the threat from Russia. This was announced by the country's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. Denmark's Defense Minister, Troels Lund Poulsen, noted that thanks to these new resources, the armed forces will have the ability to actively counter threats far from its borders. According to Poulsen, the experience of the war in Ukraine has shown that it is difficult not only to build layered air defense, but also to have the means to strike targets on enemy territory, including missile launchers.
Denmark on its own is hardly able to defend itself against Russia, which is why Denmark is one of the key members of the North Atlantic Alliance, the so-called NATO bloc. Over the past 3 decades, the European member states of NATO have seriously disarmed their military capabilities. In Europe, there was a prevailing belief in the steadfast protection provided by the United States. But with Donald Trump coming to the White House, it quickly turned out that this was definitively not the case.
According to me, the commander-in-chief of the Dutch army, General Michael Weigers Hilgaard, says that high-precision long-range weapons will allow the military to counter threats before they reach their territory.
The Dutch, among others, are interested in acquiring and deploying such weapons. Missile systems with a range of over 600 kilometers. Over 600 kilometers, which means beyond the range of short-range tactical missiles.
The Russian ambassador to Copenhagen, Vladimir Barbin, immediately responded to Denmark's statement. According to him, nowhere and never in the world has anyone even thought of publicly threatening a nuclear state. And now Russia has to proceed from the fact that Denmark is not only considering the possibility of a direct military confrontation with it, but is also preparing for such a scenario.
They are clearly demonstrating to Russia, and in fact, their primary and overarching goal was to explicitly demonstrate the profound and undeniable lack of unity within the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to actively sow deep discord and significant disagreement among the various member states of the alliance, to ultimately split and effectively destroy the entire European security system, which has been painstakingly built over many decades. In some significant ways, they are indeed succeeding. They are succeeding with rather simple yet effective methods at first glance, where it is quite easy to definitively prove Russia's guilt. If you don't want to see it, it's very difficult not to. Nevertheless, many Europeans are already clearly seeing the aggressive and expansionist nature of the Russian Federation, and while they have not yet fully accepted the undeniable fact that a potential war with Russia, if not entirely inevitable, is indeed quite possible and a very real threat. Moreover, in the near future,
Prime Minister Frederiksen tweeted in response to the statement by the Russian ambassador that they will in no way influence Denmark's decision and that her country will not allow Russia to intimidate them.
Chornovol is once again a member of parliament. The Central Election Commission has recognized servicewoman Tetyana Chornovol as a member of the Ukrainian parliament. The decision was made after receiving the document on the early termination of Andriy Parubi's powers, who was shot dead on August 30th in Lviv. Tetyana Chornovol has had combat experience since 2014. At that time, she defended Mariupol as part of the Azov battalion. From the very first day of Russia's full-scale invasion, she fought as part of the 72nd Black Zaporizhian Brigade and the 126th Separate Territorial Defense Brigade. Chornovol also commanded a Stugna P anti-tank missile system crew in the 1st Separate Ivan Bohun Special Forces Brigade. The Anti-Corruption Action Center found 8 pieces of premium real estate in the USA belonging to the family of NSDC Secretary Rustem Umerov. We're talking about 3 apartments in Florida, 1 in New York, and 4 villas near Miami, where family members currently live or have lived in the past. According to Umerov's 2024 declaration, his wife Leila and their 3 children live in the USA. The anti-corruption activists found the 8 properties through paid databases, open registries, and their own activist sources. For security reasons, the exact addresses and photographs are not being disclosed. The declaration shows that the official's wife has been renting an apartment of 137 square meters since October 2019, where Umerov and the children are also registered. Another apartment in the Chalconte complex in Boca Raton with an area of 134 square meters is rented for about $7,000 a month. Umerov's father rented an apartment here with an area of 450 square meters, valued at $1,200,000. In New York, Umerov rents a 2-room apartment in Manhattan where his brother is also registered. Rent for such an apartment is about $7,000 per month, and its value is $1,300,000. There are also 4 more villas in Boca Raton connected to Umerov's wife and relatives. Their rent and value range from $4,500 to $10,000 per month. A soldier returned from captivity and personally removed his own photo from the Alley of the Missing. In Krasnokutsk, Kharkiv region, an alley with portraits of missing soldiers was recently opened. But literally right away, fortunately, one photo had to be taken down. It was the Ukrainian defender himself, 48-year-old Ihor Yakovlev, who did this after returning from Russian captivity. This moment is truly symbolic in action. That's all the news for this hour. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It will help us grow.